After my passing away, all sons and daughters who are of good family and are faithful should, as long as they live, go to the four holy places and remember, here at Lumbini, the enlightened one was born. Here at Bodhgaya, he attained enlightenment. Here at Sarnath, he turned the wheel of the Dharma. And here at Kusinara, he entered paranirvana. Bhikkhus, after my passing away, there will be activities such as circumambulation of these places and reverence to them. Thus it should be told to them, for they, who have faith in my deeds and awareness of their own, will travel to higher states. After my passing away, the new bhikkhus who come and ask of the doctrine should be told of these four places and advised that a pilgrimage to them will help purify their previously accumulated karmas or actions. So that was allegedly the word of the Buddha, but actually it comes from the Vinaya Sutra, which was written 1,000 years after the Buddha. So we don't, to be honest, know if that's what he actually said, because there's nothing about it in the Pali Canon, which does date from the time of the Buddha. So whether the Buddha actually advocated pilgrimage or not, we're not sure. And that's what this talk is about this evening, pilgrimage and the spiritual journey. Regardless of whether the Buddha advocated pilgrimage or not, within a very short space of time after his death, pilgrimage had become established. But today, in the 21st century, what is the purpose of pilgrimage? Is it a valuable Buddhist practice or just an excuse for exotic tourism? Is it an important means of connecting with our spiritual ideals or self-indulgent virtue signaling? That's what we're going to explore this evening. So let's look at the history first of all then. So, of course, pilgrimage is a tradition in many religions. You will probably be aware of the Hajj, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which typically, in a typical year, obviously this isn't a typical year, but in a typical year, 2.5 million people go on the Hajj. Then there's the Kumbh Mela in Hinduism, which occurs roughly every 12 years, and 40 million people attend that event, which is the biggest gathering of people on earth. Christianity, of course, is not to be left out. There is the Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage to the city of Santiago de Compostela. We have Lourdes, of course, and I've already mentioned pilgrimage in Buddhism. There's the 4 principal places of pilgrimage in Buddhism, as I mentioned in the sutra I just quoted. So first of all, we have, I hope you can see there, we have Lumbini, which is the place of the birth of the Buddha. In fact, the white building there is a building erected to cover the remains of the temple that was built on the supposed site of the place of the birth of the Buddha. There's one of the famous Ashoka pillars there in the front. Ashoka was an emperor who I've spoken about a couple of times, who came 200 or 300 years after the Buddha and did a great deal to establish Buddhism and grow Buddhism. There's a Buddha tree in the background, a Bodhi tree in the background, and there's a pool where allegedly the Buddha's mother bathed after giving birth. So that's the first of the 4. Then we have the Mahabodhi Temple at Bodhgaya, which in Buddhist mythology is said to be the center of the universe. And it certainly is a wonderful place to visit, I would say. My favorite place on earth, I think. So we have the Bodhi tree, of course. We have the diamond throne on which the Buddha sat when he gained enlightenment, and loads of stupas and rupas and various buildings and trees and places in the campus. Then we have the site of where the first turning of the wheel took place at the deer park at Sarnath. So here we have, in fact, a stupa built, of course, by our old friend Ashoka. And there's one of his pillars there as well. And so you can visit that and see the place where the Buddha first taught. And then finally, the place of the Buddha's passing, the parinirvana at Kusinagara, or Kusinara, as it mentioned in the sutra. So there you see a recreation of the Buddha as he lies on his deathbed, as it were. And we can hardly speak of Buddhist pilgrimage, though, without mentioning the Chinese pilgrim, Xuanzang. So there's Xuanzang there, who spent 17 years traipsing around the Indian subcontinent for 10,000 miles, facing all sorts of perils and dangers and so on and so forth. And he was collecting teachings which he wanted to take back to China. So that was a pilgrimage of epic proportions. And he returned home in 645 CE. But even in the UK, which you could say is probably quite a secular country these days, we have a history of pilgrimage. I learned just the other day, in fact, that they believe now that there was pilgrimages to Stonehenge taking place 4,000 years ago. And of course, in the Middle Ages, in medieval times, pilgrimage was very important. Christian pilgrimage, that is to say, of course, in the UK. So perhaps the most popular being in England was the pilgrimage to Canterbury to see the tomb of Thomas Becket. And you could say it was very big business. If you thought that selling merchandise was a new phenomena, well, think again, because each traditional pilgrimage had its own merchandise. So it was very big business back in the day, even in the Middle Ages and medieval times. So here you see a collection of badges that accompanied the pilgrimage to Canterbury and to Thomas à Becket's tomb. So if you went on that pilgrimage, you would buy one of these heads. They're supposed to be the head of Thomas Becket, and wear that on your clothing to show either that you were on the pilgrimage or that you had been on the pilgrimage. And of course, in addition to all these, all the paraphernalia, here's another one. This is a shell, which is symbolic of the Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage, the Camino de Santiago. So this particular one looks very nice, a nice metal one, and all the pilgrims would buy these shells to show that they'd been on the pilgrimage. So it was big business. It wasn't just merchandise. There was also inns, food establishments, souvenirs, much of which the religious houses controlled themselves. So there's a lot of money to be made out of the pilgrimage industry. And in England, of course, that all came to a big full stop with the Reformation, partly because Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell were unhappy that it was a bit of a racket in many ways. So there were all these places that had pieces of the true cross and all that sort of thing, enough to probably make a forest of true crosses if you put them all together. And you might be aware as well that in Glastonbury they somehow found the tomb of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere as well, which became a popular site of pilgrimage. So it was all a bit of a racket, and so that was shut down in England at the time of the Reformation. But pilgrimage seems to be becoming more popular again. It was something that I think in this country at least, you never really heard about a few decades ago. But now we even have TV shows where celebrities, of course, go on pilgrimage, and we watch them on television. People are seeking spiritual answers, of course, in a way that I don't think people did in my parents' time, perhaps in less conventional ways. And of course, as well, people are more affluent than they used to be and probably have more time as well. And in this country, it's not just Christian pilgrimage that's making a comeback. We've had within our own movement, there's been a British pilgrimage taking place to various sacred spaces in the UK, often led by Jayaraja, who you might have heard speak here 2 or 3 weeks ago. And if you go to the British Pilgrim Trust website, it advertises a variety of pilgrimages, including to Avebury and to various natural springs, such as Bath. So why is this then? Why is pilgrimage coming back? Well, perhaps we should look at its purpose. So one of the descriptions of pilgrimage is a journey to a holy or wholesome or special place. Pilgrimage, I think, fits very well in our current theme that we have on Sangha Nights. At the moment, we're between action and mindfulness. And pilgrimage really fits very well between those two, because there's an aspect of action to pilgrimage. Clearly, you're deciding to move yourself to a particular location, but it's very much as well mindfulness. You're bearing in mind a certain thing, a certain goal, a certain object, all the time that you're progressing. In a sense, there's no particular objective to a pilgrimage, no particular outcome that you're seeking. Making a pilgrimage could be said to be an end in itself. And there could be all sorts of reasons for that. You could be wanting to foster a spiritual discipline. So let me show you an image which perhaps represents this. So there's a Japanese pilgrimage route known as the Shikoku Pilgrimage. And this involves circumambulating the island of Shikoku and taking in during that time 88 temples during the course of a 1,200 kilometer journey. And an order member made that journey and documented it in the order member newsletter, Shabda. Not in a great detail, he didn't mention it in great detail, but it was very interesting to learn about it. And it was quite arduous. You would do this in 1 to 2 months. So you'd be walking 20 to 40 kilometers a day, every day. He was getting up at 4:30, and he would bear in mind or chant mantras as he was walking around, or chant pujas. Much of the time he was solitary. Sometimes he would spend some time with other pilgrims. But it was quite arduous, and it was quite a commitment. And it was definitely a spiritual discipline. But it did sound very attractive as well to me. And here you can see a pilgrim in this picture. You would wear a traditional white smock. You would wear the straw hat with some wording on it. And then you would have your staff as well. And everybody would know that you were on the pilgrimage. You might also go on pilgrimage because you wanted to fulfill a vow. Christopher Columbus, who is another subject that interests me a great deal, on his return voyage from his journey to discover, or the journey where he discovered America, the 2 remaining ships got separated in a huge storm, and it was very, very scary. These guys were experienced sailors, but they were absolutely terrified. And they were praying to whatever gods they believed in, well, God, presumably, in their case, to save them. And in particular, it got so desperate, they decided they all huddled together in one of the ships, and they all had a P. One of the Ps was marked, and whoever drew out the marked P, if they managed to survive, they would go on a pilgrimage to St. Mary of Guadalupe in central Spain and thank her for delivering them. And as it happened, Christopher Columbus drew the marked P. So after they did survive, and after they got back on dry land, he indeed made that pilgrimage to fulfill the vow to St. Mary of Guadalupe. It can also, of course, help us to express feelings of devotion that we might feel towards various objects. We express and develop devotion by puja, by bowing or prostrating or making offerings. We imbue objects with spiritual significance. And it seems natural to choose to do this in the most auspicious place possible, if that can be done. We can also, by going on pilgrimage, create a relationship with historical figures. We are separated from objects of our devotion by space and by time. In pilgrimage, on occasion, we can at least take away that spatial separation. It is quite extraordinary to be at the place, for example, where the Buddha gained enlightenment or where he taught his first sermon. It helps to build a connection. And then there can also be practical reasons, like in our old friend Xuanzang, the Chinese pilgrim who went to the Indian subcontinent to collect all these teachings and bring them back to China. So those are all quite skillful reasons, but there can also be unskillful reasons for wanting to go on pilgrimage. So it can be virtue signaling. You know, look at me, look how spiritual I am with my little badge to say I've been on pilgrimage, and so on. It could be spiritual tourism, which in itself I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But of course the world has changed. In the Buddha's time and for centuries afterwards, pilgrimage mostly involved walking. There might be a sea voyage. If you lived in England and you wanted to go on the Camino de Santiago, or you wanted to go to Rome or the Holy Land or something like that, you'd probably have to, well, you'd have to go on a sea journey, but it was mostly walking about, really. And so you wouldn't be doing much harm by going on a pilgrimage. But nowadays, it's quite different. A lot of pilgrimage would involve flying. And of course, we have climate change. We have the problems of tourism overload in certain locations. We have pollution, and we have excessive consumption. So pilgrimage can add to all those things. And pilgrimage could also be something of a symptom of our desire to acquire, to bag certain experiences in an unhealthy way, to try to collect the whole set of experiences. So there can be various skillful and unskillful reasons for motivating us to go on pilgrimage. Looking at my own experiences, up to 12 years ago, I really had no interest in particular in going on pilgrimage. But that all changed with the International Order Convention in India in 2009. So every so many years, we have an International Order Convention. And for the first time in 2009, it was being held outside of the UK, and it was being held in India. So myself and some fellow order members from Bristol decided to go. And it was at Bodhgaya, the convention was held. But we also visited Kalimpong and Darjeeling as well. There was lots to see. I was blown away by the Mahabodhi Temple. Being at the place of the Buddha's enlightenment, I just found absolutely incredible, as well as being with other pilgrims from all over the world and from all different ages. Little children running around catching Bodhi leaves, old grannies there doing full prostrations. It was amazing. As well as visiting temples from other traditions around the site and visiting other places from the Buddha's story, from the Buddha's life story. I felt I gained a lot. I felt I gained a greater devotion, a greater understanding of our movement, of other traditions, and of the Buddha's life. I think I gained a wider interest in Buddhism in other cultures. Up to that point, I don't think I'd really been that interested in Buddhism in other cultures. And all of this, I was able to bring back with me to Bristol. Since then, I visited other Buddhist pilgrimage sites on the subcontinent. And earlier this year, in January, I went on a pilgrimage, really, that involved traveling through India and visiting India and Nepal. So I visited the caves of Ajanta and Ellora. I visited Kushinagar, Lumbini, Kathmandu, and the highlight in some ways was Sanchi, which I hopefully will share a picture of you now. So Sanchi was never visited by the Buddha himself. It was built after the time of the Buddha, but it's particularly associated with the Emperor Ashoka, whom I'm particularly interested with myself. It's where Ashoka met the love of his life, his first wife, but it's also important because it was the place where his children set off to take the Dharma to Sri Lanka, where it's been ever since. And it's also a place of reverence for Buddhists for hundreds of years since that time. And it contains the most amazing carvings that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. They're really, incredible quality considering their age. This carving is of the Bodhi tree itself, where people are making reverence, making offerings, beings both earthly and unearthly, I think. So it really was quite a superb time for me. I really enjoyed. Spiritual journeys, though, can be broader than that. Pilgrimages are a subset, really, of spiritual journeys in general. I've taught in talks on myth earlier this year. We've heard how myth can be a way of bringing meaning to our existence. And pilgrimages or spiritual journeys can be another aspect of that. So an example for that for me was just after I got ordained in 2003, I decided I'd like an image of green Tara, which was my given sadhana practice. So I asked Aloka. Aloka is, as you may know, is quite a well-known artist within the movement, and he painted the main image that we have in the shrine room in Bristol. And I'm a big fan of his work, so I asked him if he would paint me an image of green Tara. And he agreed. So the upshot was I then embarked on a journey to his house with my wife to go and pick up this image. He lives in Norwich. So it was quite a long journey. We stayed overnight in a hotel, but it took on some sort of mythic qualities. It became for me a spiritual journey to go and see this. Aloka himself is quite, a significant figure within the movement. Almost, well, he is kind of a mythic figure in some ways. And so to visit him, see his incredible house where he lives with his partner was amazing. And go and pick up and see for the first time this image he'd created for me based on the cues that I'd given him was quite an extraordinary experience. So that very much was, and there it is, by the way, there is the very image that I picked up that Aloka created for me 17 years ago. So that very much took on the aspect of a spiritual journey. But also it can be visiting Triratna centres, either this country or in other parts of the world. That can have a quality of spiritual journey about it. And visiting Adhisthana, I think, is becoming more and more important and more taking on the qualities of a spiritual journey as it's become increasingly important to the movement. After all, it's only been there, 10 years or so, something like that. And now, of course, it's Sangharakshita's resting place as well, the resting place of the founder of our movement. So I think visiting Adhisthana can be quite symbolic now as well. Also, you might find a spiritual journey to be visiting places that are not specifically Buddhist, but have some spiritual significance for you. Maybe places in the natural world, whether it is a natural spring or Avebury, or something from the ancient world, or perhaps places of other faiths. Certainly, I've been very moved sometimes visiting cathedrals, Christian cathedrals and so on. They can touch you in certain ways, I think. So what are my motives then for going on pilgrimage? Well, in truth, I would imagine, like most things, they're probably a bit mixed, really. Some skillful aspects and some less skillful aspects. Certainly, there have been benefits for me, I think, and I would hope that those benefits spread out to the rest of the Sangha locally. I certainly like to travel and explore. There's something about the myth of exploration, like your Columbuses and so on that I find interesting. I like the adventure of traveling. And I also like time alone. I don't get a great deal of time on my own. So to be able to journey on my own for a couple of weeks in a strange, relatively strange land anyway, is quite significant and meaningful for me. But of course, the costs in terms of the environment are becoming ever more apparent. These days, the International Order Convention is being held every 4 years, whereas not long ago it was every 2 years, in part because of the overhead of travel that it involves. And that, of course, is before taking coronavirus into account. So where does this leave us then? I would certainly suggest bringing the idea of a spiritual journey into your practice, seeing if you can add meaning to certain activities that you do, making more tangible that which is ephemeral. As for a formal pilgrimage, well, each to their own. I can quite understand why some people find it exciting and some people have no interest whatsoever. Practice, ultimately, is in one's own mind, and this can be carried out anywhere. Pilgrimage, therefore, is not essential. Some people enjoy it and some don't. But it has to be set against the cost to the environment of flying. So we have to think carefully about our motivations. From my own experience, I've no doubt that it can bring great richness to travel and to deepen one's practice and to understanding from engaging in pilgrimage. Thank you very much.